In October, many of us are going to read Victorian literature together. I have a few titles here. Most of them are from my own shelves or from my local library. I will show you what I've got in the second half of the video. But before that, I read 5 books in September. I read All's Well That Ends Well and Coriolanus by William Shakespeare, and a novel also called All's Well by an author called Mona Awad. I listened to the audiobook, and Virginia Woolf's Orlando, and a non-fiction book called Rooted by Edward Rhodes. I will talk through all of them one by one. First of all, Coriolanus and All's Well That Ends Well by William Shakespeare. I read these 2 plays in September as part of the Shakestember Reading Challenge. I made a dedicated video for each of them, so I won't say much more here. They both have protagonists with a complicated personality, and I really enjoyed reading and thinking about them last month. Reflecting on myself as a beginner reading Shakespeare's plays, I can see myself understanding his language a bit better and enjoy his plays more in little steps. My Coriolanus video is 28 minutes. I would never have believed one day I could talk about a character in a Shakespeare's play for 28 minutes. If you have been here since the beginning, I started my channel 1st of November last year. If you've been here the whole time, you might remember my review of The Tempest in my November wrap-up last year. I simply had nothing to say. Seriously, that section was about like a second or like 5 seconds. I had nothing to say. It's quite shocking to see how lazy I was, but also it's quite nice to see how far I've come on this journey. I feel this a lot recently. I feel that the earlier I get to a book, the more unfair I'm likely to be towards that book, because I was such an awful reader. I feel sorry for the classics I've read and disliked and told everybody I disliked, because it's probably something to do with me and nothing wrong with the books. I'm still very new to a lot of the classics, a lot of the authors, so it's quite nice to know that even if I wronged them at the beginning, there are many more titles to get to, there are many more opportunities I can become friends with them. There's a lot more to learn. The next book is All's Well by Mona Awad. I listened to the audiobook. This one was recommended by fellow booktuber Fraser Simons. He left me a comment on my All's Well That Ends Well video saying I want to read it, as in the Shakespeare's play, sometime, and then reread Mona Awad's All's Well, as that book has the protagonist as a theatre teacher putting on that play, and there's a lot of meta context to it, and I missed all that having never read the play. I thought that would be a perfect book to read last month, having just read All's Well That Ends Well by that point. So I bought the audiobook immediately. I was in Eastbourne that week, and that story, that novel, was the only negative thing during that whole week. It's a bit annoying now that my lovely memory of Eastbourne is now mixed with that unpleasant novel. It's unpleasant to me because I personally don't like the storyline and I don't like the protagonist, but I think it's a very clever and very effective novel with excellent writing. I just don't like the story itself or the protagonist. I even think maybe that's the author's intention, that's like on purpose, I'm not 100% sure, because the protagonist, Miranda, is not a straightforward character that you like or hate. She's a bit like Helen, All's Well That Ends Well. She's complicated, and I certainly didn't like Helen in a straightforward way. I didn't like Helen at all. The protagonist was a theatre teacher in a high school. She had unbearable pain in her back, in her legs and feet because of a theatre accident, and followed by a series of surgery accidents when she was an actor. So she decided to put on All's Well That Ends Well this year in school instead of Macbeth despite the school curriculum and made herself really unpopular among the students. And her favorite student, Ellie, had to play a minor role, even though Ellie was perfect for Helen, because Helen was to be played by another girl whose parents were rich and influential. But one day, suddenly, almost overnight, everything changed. Her pains went away and all the students obeyed her every word. The rich girl got sick, so Ellie got to play Helen, play the lead. All's well, like magic, all's well. But what was the dark side of this magic, and what was the price to pay? It obviously has a lot to do with all's well that ends well. For example, the uncertainty of the ending. All seems to be well, but is it really well? And also, all seems to be well at the end, but does it mean the happy ending justifies the means? It also has a lot to do with Macbeth, actually. For example, Miranda, the main character, fell off the stage while she played the role of Lady Macbeth, and the three men in black suits in the pub were clearly the three witches, and the protagonist getting rid of everyone in her way, one after another, quite ruthlessly, was a bit like Macbeth himself as well, really. Next one, Orlando by Virginia Woolf. The full title is Orlando, a Biography. So this is a fictional biography of Orlando. We first meet Orlando in his great country house as a young boy, age 16, and in one of the memorable moments we see him kneeling in front of Queen Elizabeth I. So that's where we start, and by the end of the biography we are in 1928. That was when Virginia Woolf wrote and published this novel, and we have at that point Orlando as a woman, age 36. I heard Orlando described as something like a person lived through 4 centuries and changed genders in between. I have always been curious how he lived through 4 centuries and how he changed genders in between. Did he live, die, keep being reborn with the same memories as the same person? And did he change into man or woman each time? I have now found out that Orlando lived one life over 400 years and changed from man to woman once in between. When I realized Orlando was going to live through 400 years with very little aging, I had 2 questions. One was, how was Virginia Woolf going to mark the progress of time and history throughout the novel? And secondly, how were people around Orlando going to react to his clearly very slow aging process? I think for the second question, I was clearly too pragmatic because Virginia Woolf was very playful about it. Nobody minded at all. A few other characters actually aged at the same speed as Orlando himself, and it was the same with his change of sex. His household staff and his social circle seemed to think it the most natural thing. At one point during Orlando's life, he set out to furnish his ancestral home. Indeed, when Orlando came to reckon up the matter of furnishing with rosewood chairs and cedarwood cabinets, with silver basins, china bowls, and Persian carpets, every one of the 365 bedrooms which the house contained, he saw that it would be no light one. Then I remembered in Mad About Shakespeare, Jonathan Bates' memoir, he describes the building project of Thomas Sackville, a cousin of Queen Elizabeth I. He embarked on a huge rebuilding project, creating a home with 365 rooms, 52 staircases, 12 entrances, and 7 courtyards. The Sackville have lived there ever since. Orlando's house with 365 bedrooms is the same house built by Thomas Sackville, and this is the Manor of No in Sevenoaks. the home of Vita Sackville-West, who had a intimate relationship with Virginia Woolf. You can still see it today. It's breathtakingly beautiful, even just looking at the pictures. And with the history and the association with Virginia Woolf, with Vita Sackville-West, and with Shakespeare, I would love to spend the afternoon there. There are many other links between Orlando in the novel and Vita in real life. Orlando married a woman called Pepita, which was also the name of Vita's grandmother, and Orlando had to go through a legal battle to inherit her ancestral home because she became a woman. That echoed the fact that Vita couldn't inherit her family home, no, because she was a woman. Virginia Woolf is still a very challenging author for me. I really need to read Orlando again to make any intelligent comments at all. So I will just quote Jonathan Bate. The book is a love letter not only to Vita, but also to English literature. Next one, Rooted, reconnecting with the history of the church. This is an introduction of church history in Europe, mainly between the end of New Testament and the 20th century. Each chapter covers a historical period. It's very impressive. A 200-page book tries to cover 2,000 years of church history, but I think the problem is obviously the author can't spend much time in any historical period or give many examples of any personal lives. It reads a little bit like a textbook or a long Wikipedia page with many facts. I did learn a lot, but I also mixed things up pretty quickly. Here are a few interesting things I learned from the book. Apparently, the clocks, mechanical clocks, were invented by monks because they needed to know the times for their appointed prayers. I always thought clock was invented by train drivers. And apparently Lutheranism, although it strongly emphasizes justification through faith alone, it is still a lot closer in much of its theology to the Catholic Church than most other branches of Protestantism. And it was Zwingli rather than Luther who established the doctrines familiar to most evangelicals. I didn't know that at all. When he talks about the Great Awakening in Britain, he says, while John Wesley died as a priest of the Church of England, Methodism broke away from Anglicanism following his death and became yet another denomination of Christianity, with a particular presence among working class, industrial communities in England and Wales. This work of the Methodists among poorer communities and the fact that many of the French revolutionary leaders were deists or atheists almost certainly helped prevent the spread of such violent revolution to Great Britain, despite the existence of many homegrown radical movements. I'd love to read a book, just expand on that single paragraph. If you know any recommendation, please let me know. So that's all the books I read in September. Now let me show you some potential titles I might read in October. It's also a bit of a library book haul. Many of us are participating in Victober this coming month, reading Victorian literature with 5 challenges suggested by 5 hosts. I am not going to follow the challenges as strictly as I did for Jane Austen July, just because October is a very busy month and the beginning of term and all that, so I don't think I can do that, but I will do my best and I will join the group read, which is Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge. This is my second Thomas Hardy. Like I said earlier, I treated the first one, which was Far From the Madding Crowd, really unfairly. I unfortunately watched the film, which was a very faithful adaptation, not long before I read the book, so I knew exactly what happened. I was so impatient to get to the end because it's like, this is so long. I know what happened. Just let me finish this. I knew nothing about this one, and this is my second chance to get to know Thomas Hardy a bit better. One of the challenges is to read some short stories written by Victorian authors or in Victorian period. I found The Golden Age of British Short Stories 1890 to 1914 from the library. This one has 34 different short stories in it by 34 different authors. I had a quick flick through, and this might be a deliberate decision. If it is, I don't understand why. I can't find the publication date for each short story. There are biographies at the back for all of the authors, but I can't find anywhere like which year at least each short story was written or published in. That would be useful, isn't it? Because it clearly says it's from 1819 to 1914. So I thought like kind of the year would be an important thing. Especially I'm trying to read the ones from the Victorian era, so it's not very convenient for my purpose. But I will assume this is in chronological order. Because the last one is D.H. Lawrence, the first one is Kipling. So many of the authors here you associate, well, I associate with the Victorian era closely, like more closely than some other ones. For example, Kipling, Thomas Hardy, Oscar Wilde, Henry James. I see these authors more Victorian authors, and obviously D.H. Lawrence, James Joyce, Ian Foster, they are more early 20th century, so you just class them as modern. So this will be a good short story collection to dip into every now and then. I will just pick a few names that I like the look of. For example, Saki, there's one called Gabriel Ernest. I read one of Saki's Christmas short stories. It was hilarious. It was very, very funny, and I liked his writing style a lot, and I have always wanted to read more by him. So here is one. I will definitely read the one by Saki. So that's the short story collection. Another challenge for Victober is to read some poems by Victorian authors. I really struggle with poetry. Narrative poems are less of a problem. I actually quite enjoy those. For example, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I was surprised how much I enjoyed that one. That's not Victorian, obviously, but everything else gives me a headache. So I asked the host to suggest something, recommend something for a beginner poetry reader whose first language is not English, and Ross very, very kindly recommended In Artist's Studio by Christina Rossetti, and she also sent me a link with some notes, I think, on that website. So that was very kind of her. Thank you very much. I also have this small booklet of selected poems by Christina Rossetti anyway, so I might read a few more of her poems from this collection. Maybe the Goblin Market. Goblin Market is quite a famous one, I think, and that's a narrative poem as well, so I might enjoy that. We will see. And next I have another book for this challenge, and please don't laugh. I've got GCSE, the Poetry Guide. This is my desperate attempt to understand poetry a bit more. We got Thomas Hardy in here, Elizabeth Browning in here, and Robert Browning, and it has lots of notes and commentaries and questions to guide you to think properly. You got notes. I need all the help I can get. I wish all poetry collections have notes. Let me know if you recommend any poetry anthology with notes or commentaries for beginners, or yeah, just with some help. I need all the help I can get. Please leave me a comment if you know something suitable for me. Another challenge for Victober is to read a coming-of-age story. I got Henry James' What Maisie Knew, which I think is probably a slightly unusual choice. I haven't seen many people talk about this. Partly, I think, because Henry James' residency in the US and the UK makes him a less typical Victorian author, but the Oxford reading list that I got includes him, so I will include him as well. So that's one reason why it's a bit unusual. the other reason is I'm not 100% sure this is actually a coming-of-age story. The protagonist is a child, and she will grow up, right? So I will take it. And also, according to its Wikipedia page, it does sound like a coming-of-age story. It says, it tells the story of the sensitive daughter of divorced, irresponsible and narcissistic parents. The book follows the title character from earliest childhood to precocious maturity. So that's the general what the story is about. And why did I choose this one? I read a short analysis of one paragraph in What Maisie Knew in this book, How Fiction Works by James Wood. And I was very impressed by Henry James' genius writing style, and I remembered it ever since. Also, I read Henry James' Portrait of a Lady, and as usual, I had a lukewarm feeling towards it because, as I said earlier, I was just a terrible reader. So I want to give Henry James another go and hopefully appreciate him a bit more this time round. Next, I got 2 books from G.K. Chesterton, The Man Who Was Thursday and The Napoleon of Notting Hill. Both published in early 20th century. I had enough of hearing him quoted everywhere and never read anything by him myself. So I got The Man Who Was Thursday from a secondhand bookshop and The Napoleon of Notting Hill in the library. I will read the blurb. The Napoleon of Notting Hill sounds amazing. G.K. Chesterton imagines a London where democracy is dead. A minor government minister is appointed king. The old city boroughs are suddenly declared separate kingdoms, each with their own city guard, flag, and gathering cry. No sooner is the capital plunged into a strange kind of medieval warfare than the kingdom of Notting Hill declares its independence. I think that sounds amazing, but I read out loud a few paragraphs just in random chapters to give it a go, see how it sounds like. I'm a bit worried I'm not going to be friends with this one. It's quite difficult. I find it quite difficult, but it could be just the beginning chapters are a bit more difficult than the rest of it. I don't know. I really want to like it and understand it because the blurb is amazing. I love it. I also got that one as well. If you are familiar with G.K. Chesterton, what do you recommend me to start with? Which one shall I start with? Are either of these the best place to start with him? If I don't get on with them, which title do you recommend I should try first? I have determined I will read G.K. Chesterton, but I need a starting point, so please help. I'm having a break reading Shakespeare's plays this month, but I will continue reading plays in general. So this month I'm going to read The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. I read Acts 1 and 2 already and was very impressed by the clever title and the double meaning of the title. I didn't know anything about it, and thank goodness I haven't watched any film or anything like that to ruin the experience yet. I really like it comparing to Shakespeare's complicated characters or tragedies, like quite tragic tragedies. This is just purely comedy, this is purely funny, and it's very romantic, and I really love it. And this also gives me a complete new aspect of Oscar Wilde's writing. I only read The Picture of Dorian Gray so far by him, and that was very grim, but this is completely different. This is like the sunny side of his personality. I don't know him very well, but I feel like, yeah, it feels like a completely different personality. I don't know how to describe it, but you know what I mean. I love it very much. I'm looking forward to see the end of it, Act 3. The last two are Dominion by Tom Holland and The Air We Breathe by Glenn Scrivener. These are for the next 2 months, realistically. They are both broadly about how Christianity influenced Western culture and values throughout history, but from two different perspectives. Tom Holland is a historian, Clarence Rivenner is a church minister and evangelist. So it'll be interesting to read both and compare and contrast, I think. So I will report on those as well. At the end, just a reminder, please leave me suggestions and book recommendations for history of the Great Awakening in Britain and French Revolution, and secondly poetry collections for beginners with notes, and also where do you recommend me to start with Chesterton. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. I will see you